or in a 2-hour movie, or in a VR experience. They're truly quite amazing. But I want Anand to start off, please, by telling us really, trying to tell us, because I think he's such a wonderful storyteller. He tells us where we are, what we've just been through, especially, I believe, Anand, as you working on a movie called Emergence, which is set in a post-pandemic world, and we're not
Right.
quite over the pandemic. So tell us what really we've been through. How do you make sense of it?
Kaveri, thank you for having us on the show and for your kind words. We do take this assignment, this job uh, of telling stories and quite seriously. And what we think of uh, what the way we think of this job that we have assigned ourselves is that it's up to us to look at the greatest breakthroughs that we have at our disposal as a civilization. The greatest ideas, the greatest insights, the greatest paradigms and frameworks that we create as a society, as a civilization. Um, and these may be coming from an understanding and a vision for the future of humanity. These could be insights that have been lost to history. These could be insights that have come to us from the the greatest breakthroughs happening in cognitive behavioral sciences and evolutionary biological sciences. uh, our job really as storytellers is to distill these insights to um, and make them accessible to a much larger world who would not otherwise have access to these ideas. Our job as storytellers, we think, is to make complex intuitive, is to look at these incredibly wonderful ideas that we have at our disposal as an enlightened civilization, or as a civilization in constant process of inquiry and constant process of intellectual inquiry and solving larger and larger problems, taking these questions, taking these answers, taking these ideas, taking these breakthroughs, and making them into into intuitive experiences that does not require our audiences to necessarily go through the 20, 30, 40-year rigor that scientists and thinkers and policymakers go through to have arrived upon those ideas in the first place. So essentially, we tell stories that can help us course correct, that can help us envision our futures together as societies, and chart our course, chart a journey arrive at those futures, arrive at the futures that are most agreeable to most of us and are most sustainable and produce most amount of well-being and longevity for most of us. And that's really our job as storytellers. So we do flirt with the notion of being simultaneously scientists and artists and philosophers. That and that we often joke that if the Buddha was around today, he would have been a filmmaker as well, or a game designer as well.
Yeah.
So
I wonder, but what happens, Anand, when the future or the present it doesn't seem to show a way out? Civilization, of course, we've had the Spanish flu, and everyone knows that it lasted for a long period. But in fact, I was speaking to someone recently, and she was saying, in fact, there's not enough literature about the Spanish flu, which she found very interesting compared to, say, the world wars. And she was wondering why that was so, considering it was such an epidemic. So do you think
that's such
this
a fascinating
pandemic,
insight.
yeah, do you think the pandemic is going to be something like that we'd rather just forget about it, and not sort of incorporate it into our world, or tell our story?
You have asked such a fascinating question. This question is really at the heart of so much that we do and think. And this is really, I mean, we have an answer that would take a thesis to explain why this happens, but we understand this phenomenon pretty well.
Hmm.
Our minds are attuned to looking at acute problems and not be able to process chronic problems very well.
Hmm.
We have evolutionarily been designed to look at immediate risks of war, for example, of threats that are immediate
Hmm.
and visible,
Hmm.
uh, and designed our narratives around protecting our kin in the face of danger. So if you look at the last century
Hmm.
of 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 mainstream cinema,
Hmm.
what you or the last couple of centuries of cinema and literature, what you'd see over and over again is this theme that Dr. Frankenstein is creating is making some kind of an experiment in his dark lab, ends
Right.
up creating a monster,
Yeah.
and then and there is an Armageddon, and the only person who can save us from the Armageddon now is GI Joe's, inspired by the white president making rousing speeches about saving the world.
Right.
And reality is the exact opposite of this. For the last century, if we have been observing keenly, it's white presidents giving rousing speeches to GI Joes that have been the cause of a large
Cause
number
of
of
most of our problems. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And scientists, Dr. Frankenstein, working in the fluorescent lit lab, is really the reason that we have longevity and well-being. We have flight. We have the cure to cancer.
Yeah.
So we have been creating wrong heroes. We've been telling the wrong stories, and
Yeah,
we've been
but
telling.
Anand, just a minute, the Dr. Frankenstein has always been as part of the industrial military complex. Most of the developments, most of the advances that we've had have actually been an offshoot of something else that was happening, which was possibly related to war and weaponization. And this came off as, a byproduct. Isn't that also true?
That's true to some extent for a large number of things, but not
Right,
for everything.
right.
Some of our devices have come off war, and the reason for that again is that we have invested so heavily
Yeah,
in killing the other, in the idea of the other, in allowing this evolutionary vestige that evolved in a very different environment, in an environment of forests and savanna environments,
right.
in an environment of scarcity, in an environment where different tribes lived differently, in different conditions, almost with these species like walls between tribes 250,000 years ago. And we have allowed those instincts to exist uh, s- instincts that evolved in the scarcity of Stone Age. We have allowed them to continue, and we have allowed ourselves to respond to them in the abundance of space age. Our problems today are not that of sex and violence or love and revenge, but these are the stories that we tell each other over and over again. Our
Hmm.
problems indeed are problems of food security, of energy efficiency, of pandemics. But even and this is amazing that, I mean, this is the I think the answer, the response that I'm giving is really inherent in the question itself, the question that you asked, which is, look at us, we're amid a pandemic,
Hmm.
and we still don't seem to want to wake up. We don't seem
Yeah.
to want to wake up to the idea that science, knowledge, facts are relevant, are important. A vaccine is not going to we're not going to find a vaccine just by uh, praying or hating each other or going on wars. We are going to save humanity by doing real factual work, by doing work on our knowledge systems, on our scientific systems, and still we are, as a society, we still continue to be invested in vestigial discourses of saving ourselves in the face of danger, going to war. Our negotiations are still so obsolete, and that's really one of the problems that we wanted to highlight with Emergence.
Right.
Emergence was a film that we started writing. Zain and I started working on about now almost 6 years ago, and it was a story of a pandemic. It was not a post-pandemic story. It was a story of a pandemic.
Wow.
Um, and when we started writing it in 2014 and 15, in our early years of writing Emergence, we called it 2020. We called it 2020. It
Amazing, huh?
it was uh,
Surreal.
it was just a coincidence that we thought that 2020 is just near future. And having looked at the data and having looked at research that was coming from various parts of the world, we were cognizant that one of our imminent risks as a civilization is a mass scale pandemic. And we started working on it in the first couple of years. We wrote, we we deepened our research. We educated ourselves in public health systems. We educated ourselves in behavioral biology, even more, while working Emergence. And then we got people like Larry Brilliant on board as an advisor. We got some really incredible pandemic scientists, virologists, behavioral parasitologists on board as advisors, and that is really what we were doing just all the way until the pandemic actually struck us.
But Anand, I wonder, what did your research point to in terms of behavioral biology? Did it tell you how people were going to react? That scores of people would just be abandoned by people they'd worked for, they'd loved, they'd built cities for, they'd tended to their homes, their children. They would be abandoned by them and they would be sort of just left to their devices,
Yes,
trying to get home
yes.
desperately. Did you envision this kind of uh, uh, you know, I don't even know what to call it. Is it extremely insular? Is it this crab-like mentality? What happened to us, or what is happening to us?
Well, Kaveri, in fact, this conversation was so much in our faces for so long now. If you look at pretty much any zombie film that has been produced in mainstream American cinema in the last 15 years, you'd see most of these images that we've experienced being speculated upon, being predicted by zombie films,
Mm,
very cleverly, a lot of pandemic awareness organizations like the CDC, for example,
mm.
were in fact funding zombie movies
Really?
to yeah, yeah,
Oh,
they were. So we this was Larry Brilliant who kind of who brought our attention in that direction,
so
and
you
they
mean Anthony Fauci was behind Walking Dead?
not directly perhaps, but yeah, there have been instances where the CDC has funded
Isn't it?
directly or indirectly zombie movies.
What was the idea behind it, Anand?
The idea was exactly this: to prepare horror is is our way of preparing ourselves for eventualities of our futures,
Mm,
and also we can also use horror as a warning mechanism
mm,
for course correction. So zombie movies became a great tool. The CDC quickly realized that it's going to be difficult to get people recognize the uh, the nature of pandemic and a world going through pandemic, but it's going to be very easy to seduce them into a horror uh, cinema, and this was very clearly the intention behind a lot of horror films that were clearly very the metaphor was not even that far removed. It was absolutely in your face as a pandemic story. In fact, Tumbad,
yeah,
in that is set in 1918, it's a film that I made,
yeah.
was also designed to have some of these some of the echoes of these warning signs. Uh, the film begins right after the Spanish flu.
Spanish flu,
Uh,
exactly. Yeah.
so yeah, I mean, we have been Zain and I've been obsessed with parasitology for a while. We have been obsessed with I mean, in Ship of Theseus, there is a scene where Charwak goes to meet Maitreya,
Right.
and Charwak reads to Maitreya about this fungus, Cordyceps unilateralis,
Right.
that hijacks an ant's mind,
Mm,
hijacks an ant's behavior,
right.
and uh, and makes the ant do things that are completely detrimental for the ant and complete and absolutely wonderful for the hijacking fungus. So
Right.
the parasite makes the ant go up a tree, bite on a leaf,
Mm,
get its mandible stuck into the leaf to the point
right.
that it can't even remove itself, and then eats up the ant from inside, leaving its exoskeleton intact. Then sprouts out of the ant's head
Yeah.
and waits for the wind to carry its spores and hijack more ants.
Right.
Now, we know that we have trillions of bacteria in our body.
Yeah.
The and we know very well now that that a huge amount of our mood is controlled by our gut bacteria.
Mm,
More than 70% of serotonin used by our brain is produced by our gut bacteria.
mm,
Now, if that's the level of that's the level of uh, chemical control, uh,
mm.
a microbiome or a microbial colony can produce in the human behavior,
Right.
then one can well imagine what possible outcomes may happen if we were to indeed come in contact with a microbe, a fungus, or a bacteria or a virus that is capable uh, of manipulating human chemistry at scale.
Right.
So this was really the premise for emergence. This is what we were working on all these years. We and and everything else that you see in human behavior as we have seen it in the last year, uh, to a lot of people has not come as a surprise. To a
Hmm.
lot of people who are cued, very deeply cued in, like we were, or like some of our friends were. Not many of these phenomena were surprising at all. In fact, I was having a conversation with a very dear friend of ours, Anders Sandberg,
Hmm.
um, who heads Future of Humanities Institute at the Oxford University.
Hmm.
And I asked Anders, do you think this was a black swan event?
Hmm.
And Anders said, no, Anand, this was a black elephant event. And the elephant was right there in the room for us to see. People were screaming at the top of their lungs. Virologists, public health experts were screaming at the top of their lungs. Larry Brilliant himself, for the last 15 years,
Hmm.
has been creating Skoll Foundation funds and has Google.org and so many. And the White House, he advised the White House to create multiple funds. The Gates Foundation was advised to create funds for 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 potential pandemic threats.
Hmm.
15 years ago, Larry Brilliant had already started working on these projects. So we know that these conversations were out there. We knew that this is going to happen, but as a civilization, we are focused on PUBG and not pandemic. So that's really the situation that we are negotiating with. And as storytellers, we're trying to see how to kind of help maneuver the attention of an entire civilization towards the problems that are not acute but chronic. And 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 games are our way of doing it, and hence
Yeah.
we have Zain, who's a mastermind game designer. He's like easily the greatest thinker, pedagogist, game designer I've met in my life, and he can talk to you about how we're using games as a method, as a principal methodology now to achieve some of these aspirations.
Great. In fact, that was my cue to anyway start speaking to Zen. Zen, what Anand has been talking about, the idea of the story,
Mhm.
uh, um, currently we're in an environment where the easiest storyteller, the storyteller who tells people what they want to hear, which is like a balm to their wounded psyche, or whatever you want to call it, that whole idea of the wounded majoritarian psyche, that they've suffered a psychic wound 2000 years ago, and therefore everyone now has to pay for it. So we are in an environment where the storyteller who tells people what they really want to hear is winning. So how do you, and this is across, not just in politics, across in all fields. So how do you tell your story, which is difficult because people don't like to hear the truth? How do you tell your story in a way that is palatable to people, because we know that people would go for the easier option?
So there's a very straight comparison between the junk food we like consuming and the
Yeah.
junk culture we like consuming.
Yeah.
What basically happens is media hijacks on our most primitive, popular media hijacks on our most primitive tendencies and most primitive triggers. The triggers of xenophobia, the trigger of lust,
Hmm.
uh, to create fear or to create a sense of sense of scarcity for meeting partners. And those are stories we like hearing. We like hearing stories about wars that we win because of pure brute force, or because of unrequited love finally meeting each other. But those are stories of the past. Those are stories that we don't need to tell anymore. There are 7 billion of us, not 10,000 of us.
Hmm.
uh, Mating partners are not scarce anymore, and it's very unlikely that we'll die in a war, and more likely that we'll die in a pandemic
No
or by
more in
something
our
like.
bathroom slipping on the wet floor. Yeah.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And what the same way the same way junk food hijacks our desire to consume sugar,
Hmm. Yeah.
which is a very primitive desire, coming from a forest savanna environment where the next meal would be a question mark.
Hmm.
So our bodies grew to evolved to incentivize consumption of sugar to
Hmm.
a point where it didn't have a limit on how much sugar was good for us.
Right.
Soon we have soda companies packing as much sugar as they can possibly can in
Yeah.
a bottle to sell it to us.
Right.
That's exactly what's happening in mainstream media.
Yeah.
We are packing as much of sex, violence, and xenophobia in our culture to trigger those primitive responses. But there's something to be learned here. The question you ask is very urgent. How do we fight that onslaught of to our senses? The idea is simple. We create Trojan horses. We create media pieces that are beautiful, that are sexy, that are in every way look like the resemble the junk food that we are combating. But the second you unpack that Trojan horse, you have ideas and thoughts that are progressive. You have ideas of scientific inquiry, you have ideas of
Inclusivity.
of inclusivity, of ideas of allowing more people into our circle of kin. And that's how you do it. You create great capsules that look like something else, but the second you unpack them, they are as nourishing as possible. Because media is nothing but a software upgrade for our mind.
Right.
Now we can put all the spam you want into our systems, and that is going to corrupt the civilization. Or you can start the same way we watch our diet. We should watch our culture diet too.
Right. Right. Absolutely. How does a board game like SHASN help? Because games are really now possibly the biggest video games, especially, are the biggest entertainment. I mean, I think they'll soon be overtaking movies. Am I right?
So video games are right now larger than the film and the music industry combined.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
So that really is the principal way so-called millennials are consuming culture. And, when you listen, I just sometimes listen to the audio tracks of, say, things like, GTA and, they're all about killing, vanquishing, and the way they treat women, the way they treat the other is so derogatory. The audio tracks are, all emphasize the same kind of behavior. So again, now, how does your Trojan horse become as beautiful or as compelling as this, as GTA? Which the kid can then consume and actually become smarter. Stephen Johnson says actually video games make you smarter, but I've never quite agreed with that. Do they? He says that it at least allows you to use your brain in a complex fashion. But I wasn't always convinced of that argument. Zain, what do you say?
So there's a larger question to be answered here. The question that's to be answered is, why do we play games?
Yeah.
And the response I normally get when I ask this question is that games are fun, and that's a tautology. We do things that are fun, of course, but why are games fun? Games are fun because to understand that question, we zoom back a little more and understand that humans are not the only species that play games. We have all seen kittens and puppies play games with each other. We have the young of every species plays.
Right.
They play because play allows them to simulate their threats in their environment in a safe space. The threat is reduced so that new possibilities may be explored. So animals and even humans play tag to simulate hunting or being hunted. And this training goes a long way in training us for the world around us. But the world around us has evolved tremendously. We are right now not living in a world where we will get hunted. We are living in a world that has its own threats. So how do we create this world? How do we create games that are going to prepare us for the new world at large?
Right.
Because a child who wants to go out and play does not want to not learn. As a matter of fact, the playing is the best way of learning the human body knows.
Yeah.
So how do we hijack the desire for playing and turn that playing into something that is more relevant? And that's why we started building SHASN. So two of my close friends and colleagues, Khushbu Ranka and Vinesh Shukla, made a documentary film named An Insignificant Man.
Yeah, that's right.
And when the film released and was wonderfully received all around the world, all of us sat down at a table and realized the conversation had just begun. Now, how do I take the conversation about how the political world works, about the political world around us, to more people? We realized that it's an experience. The political circle is an experience that I wanted people to translate to people. And I wanted people to sit around the table from each other and discuss policy, not politicians. Because that's that's one thing we consider all the time. The
Hmm.
second you start talking about policy, it becomes about a person who stands for a policy,
Right.
not the merits of the policy itself. So you said, how do I get people to sit around the table and talk about politics? And that's the germ of the idea from which Shashan sprouted.
Hmm.
So we spent a year building a game that got people as young as 12 years old talking about policy decisions while battling an election out on a board. So
Okay.
while the game was an action-packed board game that had tempers and emotions flaring all over the place, what the takeaway was the key machinations behind how public policy works and how politicians come into power.
Hmm. Is there a video possibility to this, Anand? To make it
Sorry,
truly, is there a video possibility to this, Anand, to make it truly a Trojan horse?
a video possibility?
In the sense, a video game. How do you take
Oh,
this
right. Okay.
board game
Right.
and make it a video game that,
Well,
which sort of makes it truly
yeah.
PUBG with brains?
No, you're absolutely right, and there are so many layers to the question that you're asking, and it's so incredible that you are asking these questions because these questions form the foundation of what we do on a daily basis. We come to work and ask ourselves these questions and break the question down to its components. So what you're saying is absolutely right. How do we create a Trojan horse that is at once seductive? So we use, like Zain mentioned, that we hijack and we learn from uh, the naturally evolved learning instincts uh,
Hmm.
that are gamified. Uh, Children play hide and seek because it's useful in forest and savanna environments to learn to hide and seek, to learn to
Right.
hunt. Children push and pull and lift and jump because it's useful in forest and savanna environments to do that. And that's why it's fun. Our minds and bodies have learned over 250,000 years and some more, or uh, right from the beginning of hominid evolution. So for 2 million years or more, to incentivize, to reward any kind of action that is going to lead to learning.
Hmm.
But learning, as we know it in the last few centuries, uh, has been a very narrow approach of talking at people,
Yeah.
of finding insights and talking at people, and that kind of learning has not been very effective as we've seen. I mean,
Hmm.
now educationists around the world have, for the last few decades, become cognizant of the fact that learning by just talking at people is not effective at all. There is a high loss of data. It has no fidelity with the real world that one is going to face. Whereas gamified learning,
Yeah.
learning as which involves solution making, invention, creation, creative ingenuity, uh, uh, and micro rewards at every step of that creative ingenuity has proven to be actually a very successful model. And that is what we mean by entertainment. What we mean by entertainment, this very large, loose word that most people don't even really understand,
Hmm.
is a wide variety of stimuli
Hmm.
that 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 are engineered, that are precisely engineered. In the last century, where this was they were engineered by brute force. A bunch of artists would throw these stimuli at each other and see what sticks. Now we
Right.
have precise engineering for it. We have neuroscientists sitting with Netflix and with chips, with burger manufacturers
Yeah.
to tell them exactly at what sound, what taste the addiction is going to kick in. So now we have precise engineering to engineer seduction. We have precise engineering to engineer human behavior, incentivize it, reward it, and this tool is our nuclear weapon now. We can really use it to manipulate behaviors of billions of people at their detriment and the benefit of the few, or we can use this tool of seducing young people through video games by using all the natural gaming instincts of competition, of creation, of solution providing, of risk, of high stakes. Create all kinds of environments that inspire creative ingenuity and engagement and even addiction perhaps from young people, while lacing while the facade may look similar. We definitely remove and replace uh, inequality inherent in nature, inequality that we've designed as in our social systems. We make it inclusive. We and that can be achieved with very simple ideas. For example, uh, like pretty much every film that we are making now, every show we are making now has uh, has a woman hero, has a female hero.
Yeah.
Uh, Now just that we are convinced will slowly transform our discourse on how we are going to how we're going to learn to live sensitively with uh, and have spaces for for a large number of voices that have not in the last few centuries given been represented or given sufficient space. So it's not only about changing the narrative, it's also changing the narrative. We have filmmakers who are now pretty much most of the creators in the next batch of Memesys working, the young creators who are working at Memesys are creators coming from communities and spaces that have not seen representation for generations now.
Right.
So changing the narrative, changing the narrative, and hijacking and hacking the tools that have been used by the mainstream, because the mainstream has used tools which are naturally seductive. It's not that the mainstream has been made by just like a bunch of evil masterminds or anything. The
Mm.
mainstream is just all of us responding to things that are most natural to us, and things that are most natural to us are incentivizing romance, love, and sex, because that produces more of us,
Mm.
and incentivizing stories of violence,
Yeah.
because that and incentivizing stories and manufacturing the other over and over again, because these are stories of saving ourselves in the face of danger, which usually was the other tribe or the other community in
Right.
forest and savanna environments.
Yeah.
But in our current environments, that's not the case. We are all a part of a global community. We are all in fact, a part of a Gaia universe. We are one with systems. We are one with animals and bees and birds, and we are a part of this interlocked system, and we need to be respectful to that system if we want to survive for long as a species. We have understood that. We have scientifically understood that, and now that scientific understanding can be seeded by just changing tiny little bits here and there, just making tiny nudges here and there, while the facade can continue to be seductive, using mechanisms and machinizations of game behavior, of competition, make the competition healthy, of creative ingenuity, creating high stakes environments, so creating stressors that engage audiences to create puzzle solving. All kinds of mechanizations of natural learning systems can be absorbed into video gaming.
Right. Just to take this conversation into a slightly different direction, Zain and Anand, I'd like to ask you both. This is something, of course, that has troubled a whole lot of people over the years. That with globalization, we've seen, rather than a diminishing of tribalism and ethnic identities, we've actually seen a growth of these, and we've seen a growth of tribalism, identities of all kinds, and we've seen so much conflict around that. So, how does one overcome that? Because we are now truly in a global world. If the pandemic is the result of globalization, so is a vaccine. If you look at
Yes,
all the
absolutely.
vaccines right now, there is not a single vaccine that has been produced by one nation, one institution. Everything is multilateral. So both the
Absolutely.
problem and the solution are globalization. But in
Absolutely.
that globalization, look at India. You would have assumed that the liberalization over 25 years has seeded into our minds this idea of identities being erased and we becoming middle class, the middle class, our class identity overcoming everything else. It hasn't happened. It's become more tribal.
We do have a thesis. Do have a working thesis for this
Please, can
challenge.
you please share?
It's because it's because material uh, and uh, it's because technology reaches people before cognizance can, and this is
Hmm.
really the one line bumper sticker answer of that uh, uh, that we have managed as a civilization to create more and more equality. We haven't created lesser equality. If you look at the larger arc over
Hmm.
the last century, 100 years ago, slavery was legal in many parts of the world.
Right.
Women didn't have voting rights. We were not even in the periphery of the Enlightenment. That even the parochial or the very very narrow uh, uh, narrowly identifying human being today is probably more progressive than perhaps a more open-minded, progressive,
Hmm.
equality desiring individual 200 years ago. So
Hmm.
we have largely moved forward. Uh, I I I draw a metaphor from Garba, being a Gujarati, that the course of civilization moves 3 steps forward and 2 steps behind. And and the reason that happens is because technology trickles in faster than ideas of what to use it for. So
Ah,
political technology has reached the last person. That means the last person who did not have access to food, water, vaccine has access to a vote.
WhatsApp.
Has the sorry.
A vote and a WhatsApp. That's a
And
dangerous
WhatsApp. That's right.
combination.
That's right. Exactly. Exactly. That basically means has access to connecting with the world, has a
Yeah,
connection with the world, and has the right to get their voices heard.
right.
And does not know where either of these rights have come from because cognizance travels slower. Cognizance takes
Hmm.
years to travel. Just
Hmm.
understanding concepts is actual intellectual and physical labor
Hmm.
that has to be put in by the individual, whereas technology
Hmm.
is can be given out. So political technology, that of being able to give that democracy is a great political technological system. Economic technology, material technology, social technology, technologies reach people sooner. So
Hmm.
people have WhatsApp, and people have Instagram, and people have the right to vote. People have the right to claim their citizenship and their fundamental rights in this complex large world. But the cognizance of how these rights have emerged, who fought for these rights, who died for these rights, how precious these rights are, how they're not natural rights. By the
Hmm.
way, that's something that we speak about a lot. Zain and I speak about this a lot. That we conflate uh, we conflate natural rights with human rights very often.
Hmm.
Uh, you know, nature does not provide many rights to any species.
Hmm.
Nature is replete with murder and coercion.
Hmm.
But pretty much every species that does not have photosynthesis or chemosynthesis
Hmm.
uh, lives by killing, by murdering someone every day.
Right.
Uh, Whereas the human aspiration is to create a non-predatory future, first for all humans, and then perhaps for all vertebrates or
Right.
all life on the planet. So the human civilization project is a project of creating a certainty and longevity and wellness, and not violate another rights of certainty and wellness.
Right.
Uh, so while they've created political systems, and these political systems have been built on the life and deaths of thousands of great women and men who have
Right.
laid down their lives to create the slightest nuanced nudge for every policy.
Right.
They're grouped together and handed over to people who are who should be grateful in receiving these technologies, but yet have not received the knowledge systems along with them.
Right.
So these people, hence, do not necessarily always know the cost of the technologies that they have received and are willing to part with it because the cost does seem much smaller than a meal that
Right.
and
Yeah.
that is why you would see votes being sold for food, votes being sold for the most basic human needs that they don't know that they uh, they are owed these rights in any case. They are the governments that they are employing owe them food, owe them water, owe them resources in any case. They don't need to give their vote away for that. So
Absolutely.
there are that complexity of having technology, having access, having the space for having your voice heard, but not yet having access to knowledge systems that actually take a lot of labor, a lot of complex mechanizations in societies, is really the cause of where we find ourselves from time to time. But still, we feel very optimistic. We feel very hopeful that we can nudge these negotiations and conversations constantly in the long run towards more inclusivity, towards more diversity, towards more sorority, towards more liberty.
Right. Zen, I just want to bring you in here
Sure.
and ask you, when people play your board game,
Mhm.
is there a distinction in the way younger people play it and the way slightly older people play it? Say if there was a choice, as there is often in an
Mhm.
actual election, between a particular right-wing ideology
Mhm.
and the idea of freedom, right?
Mhm.
Or it is a choice between nationalism and economic development.
Mhm.
What do people tend to choose? Do they still tend to think that, okay, I have enough to eat, just about enough to eat, but I am a Hindu, so I'm so proud of the fact that I'm a Hindu. I don't want economic development. I don't want inclusivity. I don't want to embrace the other. I'm very proud of my identity, and I will choose that over anything else. How do people actually behave in your board games?
So that is the core concept of the what you pointed out as the core concept of the board game. The entire experience has been built around that fundamental question
Yeah,
about idealism versus politics.
yeah.
The game, no matter what political thought you subscribe to, be it libertarianism or socialism, be it uh, progressive or conservative, Shasan allows you to win no matter what your political beliefs are. But at strong inflection points in the game, you'll be ever so tempted to betray your belief system,
Oh,
uh, to get a small gain or a long term gain.
right.
And that's exactly what we're trying to point out with the game. Trying to point out the systemic flaws that exist in our political frameworks. It is if one politician was crooked, it would be the politician's fault. If generation of politicians have been crooked, it's because there's systemic rot.
Hmm.
And that's what the game points out. There's a systemic rot that has set in, and the game makes that bare in an attempt to make more people aware of it and hopefully inspire change.
Hmm.
uh, but I also
I
wanted to add
must
to the
play this.
yes, I'll definitely send a copy across. And to add to the point Anand was saying earlier, there are two streams that evolve parallelly: the technology we use and the
Yeah,
policy to govern technology. Now, sadly, in the world that we live in, the policy to govern technology always lags behind
yeah.
the technology itself. And it is that gap between the technology arriving and the policy coming, where populists like the Trumpian populists of the world right now have made their dime.
Hmm.
Uh, it is in that gap and that gap should not exist. We should be funding more storytellers, more futurists, more research organizations to 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 foresee the technologies of the future
Hmm.
and see what the policy issues with the technologies might be, to foresee fake news before it actually became a thing
Yeah.
and combat them. Like two of my colleagues, Pooja Shetty and Neil Pagidar, have just finished making a show which talks about the policy issues. It's a comedy, but it
Hmm.
talks about the policy issues that will arise out of AI being a part of our everyday life. When the Internet of Things truly does arrive, what happens?
Hmm. Hmm.
What is the world that we live in? What are negotiations that we'll need to have? Will there be a PETA for robots? So we need to get storytellers on board. We need to get policy thinkers on board, futurists on board to start looking at the technologies that are coming in the next generation and building policy right now.
Right. Anand, can I ask you, almost in conclusion, how do you assess the way we have been these past 9 months? How do you think something fundamental has shifted in us, or We hear, of course, of a new mutant strain, and we also hear that if it's not COVID-19, it'll be another virus and another virus, and we have to live with this kind of thing. Has something, and yet has, I don't know, have we changed at all? Do you see it around us?
Um, I'm not uh, I'm not yet seeing visible change. I'm in fact
Hmm.
predicting that we will continue to at least most of us will continue uh, to live on as if nothing happened. Uh, as we have in the past few decades of droughts and famines and
Hmm.
tsunamis and wars and skirmishes and riots and battles, and we do not necessarily put such a high premium on human life,
Hmm.
on other humans' life at least,
Hmm.
as long as it's not our immediate kin.
Hmm.
For and I think not many humans are equipped with complexity thinking and systems
Hmm.
thinking, because our educational machines have not trained us to be able to be cognizant of phenomena that emerge out of multiple variables in and emerge over long periods of time.
Hmm.
So that is really the challenge that we will have to continue solving. I don't immediately see uh, any behavior change happening at scale, but yes, of course, it has shifted our discourse, it has shifted our conversation, and at least people on the fringe, people who are agnostic about the responsibility they have towards policy and scientific inquiry and towards knowledge for the next generations, versus those who believe that they can do away with these three and depend entirely on ideas and vestiges of a traditional past, of a past that was perhaps uh, to us lesser informed, but to their minds the ancestors were somehow more informed. I don't know how,
Hmm.
but uh, those who want to continue in that direction very strongly will continue in that direction very strongly. But those on the fringe of these two extremes are likely to bend and course correct uh, towards inclusivity, progressive thought, towards understanding that our immediate urgent needs are going to be investing in our knowledge systems, in our scientific systems.
And as we know, Anand, the fringe always ends up being the mainstream, doesn't it?
That's hopeful.
If they work long and hard enough. Zen, what about you? Are you as optimistic as Anand?
I perhaps more so, but I tend to oscillate
Oh God, I'm
between
stuck with two horrible optimists. I have a
between
terrible
optimism.
pessimistic view of the world.
I tend to oscillate between optimism and understanding that we are on top of a really really tall mound, and
Pound of garbage.
one tip of the domino in the wrong direction, and things might collapse beyond control. But
Right.
with that in mind, I think we still do well.
Yeah. I was just wondering, Anand, the photographer in Ship of Theseus who gains her eyesight and loses her intuition. How much of it is us actually now? Because in a sense, we have gained something from the pandemic. We've, at least I think, we understand that something fundamental has changed, but yet has it changed, our were we better before? Has it changed us? I don't know.
I think it's such a beautiful question. I don't think I should reduce it by answering it now. I think the question itself is so poetic, and I'd like to kind of munch on it a while. It's a poetic metaphor, and it's worthy of reflecting upon.
Because I really wonder sometimes, we get our eyesight fixed, and then, we see the world as it is, and my God, it's such a horrible place.
Well,
Better to
well,
retreat into
well,
our imagination, isn't it?
well. To me, that end in Ship of Theseus at least is an optimistic end. She,
Hmm. Yeah.
I had been even more didactic. People, a lot of my friends sometimes uh, think that I'm being didactic. I'd actually been way more didactic in my prescriptive in my first draft of the script,
Hmm.
and there was actually a voiceover that goes on that along that scene of hers, where she's recalling this story to her boyfriend, and she
Hmm.
says. the the greatest painting ever made, the greatest performance ever performed, the greatest dance ever performed
Hmm.
is constantly going on.
Hmm. Yeah.
And just to be witness to it uh, is 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 uh, is perhaps now my privilege over being in the constant hurry to record it. So that was really for me an optimistic ending. I think the bottom line is that the greatest dance is going on. The greatest painting ever painted is
Hmm.
being painted constantly. The greatest puzzle ever is being constantly solved. And here we are. We we can only get better uh, as a civilization. Uh, we have this accidental tool of evolution that
Hmm.
happened to us in 3 billion years after 3 billion years of life being around, and that is of self-awareness and awareness towards ourselves and our the world that the environment and the life that we are a part of. I think we are learning very rapidly to respect that life, to respect the continuity of that life, and work towards its longevity and towards its wellness.
Great. Before I leave you two, I'm going to ask you for your top three reading in your reading list, partly for myself, so that I can quickly, try and be as smart as both of you. But what are you reading, or what would you recommend? The top three books, or whatever, or essays each of you would recommend that we read.
Zain, do you want to go first? Because
Yeah.
then I don't want to eat into your
Uh,
bookshelf.
yeah. So mine would be uh, um, uh, The Selfish Gene by Dawkins,
Right.
Breaking the Spell by Dennett,
Okay.
and Behave by Sapolsky.
Okay.
All three like life-changing books.
I'm
Okay,
going
that's
to
two of
get them right away. Anand?
That's two of
that's
yours.
yeah, exactly. That's two of my three. So I would say definitely Lives of a Cell by Louis Thomas.
Uh-huh.
Uh, I would definitely say pretty much all of V.S. Ramchandran's work, but you could start with the Telltale Brain,
Mm-hmm.
and I I recently read Chaos by I'm still like midway through it, and I think it's such a great book. It's an incredible book. In fact, both the James Clyde books would be my recommendation. So I would in fact recommend Chaos as much as I recommend Information
Hmm.
by the same author.
See, I'm going to get them right away and try and be as smart as both of you. Thank you so much,
Thank you so
both of
much.
you. And I hope we can do this again soon. And, over an hour just like this. It's truly informative and wonderful fun as well. So thank you so much for being who you are and being the people you are and doing the work you do. Anand Gandhi and Zain Memon, thank you very much for being on Tiffin Talks.
Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so much for your generosity and your warmth, Kaveri. Such a pleasure to get to know you finally.
Good. So I hope we can meet in person at some point. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.